People. Yeah, and I would like, good text. Thank you very much. And now I would like Elizabeth Lozano invite you. It's a big pleasure. And the picture is yours.
I met Algis Mickūnas. That's something I had learned this week. 1987. I will not mention the drinking. Oops, I already did. But I would like to mention a few other things about my first encounter with Algis. He will swim at 6 in the morning. I sometimes would join him at 6 in the morning for swimming. It's an extraordinary early time for me. He also introduced me to bike riding. He helped me choose my first bike, and I have never started riding a bike since. I don't own a car. That's my main means of transportation. Years later, actually 3 years later, I organized a fest trip. 20 years of Algis teaching. And to that first trip, some of the people here were present. And then I had to leave, like every student leaves. I had to leave the teacher. And leaving the teacher actually helped me come to terms with who I am. I mentioned the swimming and the biking because actually one of the things that I learned from Algis was to understand the connection between body and experience and knowledge. And when I started to understand the body, I was also thinking about the stories that he had told me about his own childhood. He said, grew up as a peasant. He said, grew up with puppies and ducklings and chickens, and I hope kittens. I don't think he mentioned kittens. And cows and goats. He was a peasant. The paper and the study that I have in front of me is about peasants. And I find the connection very important to what he introduced me to. When I left the teacher actually had a value for me, like no other teacher, and I'm not the only one. Almost everybody here has said that. I had to go back to Colombia, and not go back physically, go back to an understanding of Colombia I didn't have before. For those of you who do not know, Colombia has been engaged in a war of 50 years. That means that I was born in a war, raised in a war, grown in a war, left Colombia while in war, and I returned to Colombia every year during wartime. And for me, it became really important. I didn't want to, absolutely didn't want to. I was studying television, and I really refused to look at Colombia. Didn't want to. Too painful. Too painful. Because I grew up in a place where I was afraid every day. And I did not know I was afraid until I went to Athens, Ohio, and I experienced what it meant to be without fear, without terror. So the terror that we were talking about yesterday, in my case, and in the case of the people I'm going to talk about, it's no metaphor. It's daily. It's in your bones. So I started to research and study violence in Colombia. And I did a lot of papers around violence and how it is created and motivated and what are the logics of war. And then after I studied violence, I started to ask myself, how do people respond to violence? Because I know how I responded to violence. I responded to violence by silence, by fear, by running away. and I wanted to know if other people did the same. And I started to investigate places in Colombia that actually chose something else. Places in Colombia where people were sick and tired or running away. And I started to find out, and I say started to find out because the war in Colombia is known. The resistance to the war is not known. It is not publicized. And that reminds me as well of Lithuania while I was studying with Algis. Because Lithuania was itself going through all sorts of resistance against occupation. But I really didn't know much about that resistance. What I did remember about Lithuania was it was oppressed and annihilated by Russian or the Soviet power. I did not know much about that resistance. It was not really mentioned that much. So I'm going to read part of this, and I understand that the time is a little shorter. I have planned for 30 minutes, but I'm going to try to shorten this. Let me say that in Colombia there are a multiplicity of responses to responses to war that are non-violent. And I chose one that is, in my view, fairly extraordinary. And what I wanted to do was to investigate this place as a scene of non-violence. A scene will be constituted by actors and performances, settings and events, as well as myths, frames, stories and scripts. You could say that the scene is as well a particular event or sequences of events which are all of those elements combined. A scene could be absolutely banal, or it could be dramatic, or it could just be common sense. And I decided to visit this place. And visiting this place was not only academic for me. For me, visiting this place was, and I refer here to Bernie Glassman, is a Zen master. Bernie Glassman says that there are 3 conditions for peacemaking from a Zen perspective. The first one is unknowing. The second one is bearing witness. And the third one is action or skillful means. Skillful means in the name or in the terms of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, a Buddhist teacher as well. So I wanted to bear witness. One of the points of Bernie Glassman is he points out, he argues that out of places of great suffering come great healing. For me, I actually needed to go there to experience actually the trauma. For some reason, I wanted to go to a place of trauma. But I also wanted to bear witness to it, and bear witness to what people there do. And in part, I wanted to face that trauma because I already carried it in me. But there were people there who actually were doing something about it. So I have about 5 scenes I want to tell you, and those are scenes, those are actually situations that happen. I may not go through all of them. I will hopefully just at least discuss one. And then show you some other pictures. You've seen San Jose Apartado. I haven't mentioned much about it. These are my photos of my visiting there. It doesn't strike you as a place of war. It doesn't. This may. Scene 1. October 2003, 5 p.m. at the town of San Jose Apartado. It's a very small community, you already saw that. On the road between San Jose Apartado and La Linda Hamlet, an army unit detains 3 youth on their way back from work. Witnesses spread the news quickly. Let me stop and say that for 3 youth to be detained by the army, I want you to understand that that means that these 3 youth may be incarcerated if they are lucky, or tortured, or disappeared. So this is very grave. One of the things that you need to understand as well is that this community has declared itself neutral to all armed actors in the process. And declaring themselves neutral means that they are conscientious objectors. They don't go to the army. So if the army detains them, they will be prosecuted for violating the Colombian law that says you must pay service if you're a young man. So witnesses spread the news immediately. The situation is dire. At the hands of the army, these youths can be forced into military service or tortured or even killed and disguised as guerrillas, which is a common practice of the army. Kill civilians and then count civilians as guerrillas for a quota, because the more guerrillas killed, the more there is a quota. A group of about 80 peasants led by Patricio, one of the members of the community council, catches up with the army and demands the liberation of the youth. The soldiers deny having any youth with them, which is normal practice. The peasants state that they are not moving until the youth are returned, and they are 80. The officer in charge demands to speak with the leader. Who is the leader? You need to talk to the leader about your demands. Patricio stands and says, I am the leader. An elderly woman looks at Patricio and looks at the officer saying, he's lying. I am the leader. A teenage boy jumps and runs to the front and says, don't believe the old people, I am the leader. I'm 15, I'm the leader. You're lying, says a man. I am the leader. The officer interrupts, impatiently saying, you're wasting my time. After some further back and forth, he gives up. There's no leader, there's no way to negotiate here, these people cannot be dealt with, there are too many of them, you cannot talk to 80 leaders. So he gives up and returns the youth. That's scene 1. Scene 2. 20 minutes later, the officer has agreed to return the youth under the condition that a form is signed stating that no injuries were done on the youth. It has started to rain, so the officer needs to go inside a house to sign the form. However, Patricio stops him and says, you cannot go into any of our houses with that gun. The officer is astonished. No civilian speaks to me that way, he exclaims. He has never left his weapon unattended. Actually, the army cannot do that, particularly while on duty. Patricio insists that he must do so. Baffled, the officer disarms and enters the house under the watchful eye of 80 peasants. The form is signed and the youth are returned. This story was told to me by several people, with several variations. Stories change. There are different forms of telling the story. Jimena thinks that the last person to speak was a little girl. Patricio remembers a man. There is some disagreement on what the exact words were. The legal account of this event mentions the detention and its outcome, but gives no details of the exchange. In part because for a legal account, abuse that talks about abuse, that is a complaint, but not a celebration of resourcefulness. In spite of the differences, some aspects of the story do not vary. The army detained youth, the members of the community demanded their freedom, and the group refused to identify a leader, claiming collective agency. The officer in this particular case was confronted with a response he didn't expect, and his surprise temporarily took his threat power away. The civilians refused to follow the known script. Unarmed actors must obey armed actors, lower their heads and remain silent or plead for clemency. The soldiers and army officers were in turn robbed of their rehearsed performance and thrown into the unknown, into sloppy improvisation. In other words, the the situation did not follow the logic of threat power, but to follow the logic of integrative power, or in other words, what is called principled nonviolence in action. The officer could see in the eyes of this leaderless group an absolute willingness to face even death, before breaking principles that may safeguard the life of the community. Individual death, absolutely not that much of a big deal. To try to preserve the life of the community. The power exercised by this group of unarmed civilians is the outcome of organized resistance for more than 15 years. One could say that this, that I just mentioned, is a revelatory moment in which a profoundly attuned group of people opened to the unknown, bracketed the expected, and intuitively acted in a way that was skillful, practical, and fearless. I would like to call this battleground phenomenology, or an epoche for activists. Or you could call it practical Zen peacemaking. A bubble has been popped. The fourth wall of this interaction has been revealed. The refusal of the unarmed actors to follow the rules has revealed the conventional nature of this game. The officer is familiar with flight and fight responses, with threat, insult, and submission. He's ill-prepared for a third choice. It was Algis who introduced me to the idea of the third text, or the third. A third choice, one which is always empty and formless, and always coming from the unknown, from a sort of clear perception of situation and context. The power of tactics, that which surpasses the strategies with a move from left field, has been manifested here as an imaginative response paradoxically born of much training and preparation. This preparation of the community is in an entire lifestyle, predicated on resistance and investigation of the conditions for the possibility of living in an autonomous community devoid of traditional hierarchical structures. The community here is not only resisting the oppression of different armed actors in Colombia, it has sat down to imagine what it is to live in a community where there are no arms allowed, where every individual will count as a human being, where every child born is an act of revolt and rebellion. So they claim or try to think of a form of life that actually runs contrary to hegemonic, capitalistic, patriarchal, traditional Colombian way. And I want to mention as well that responses like this for José Apartado are not unique, are not unusual. They are responses of this kind, creative, intuitive response to seize the moment, that I think are very interesting because they are very much grounded on a particular sense of community, and a particular sense of community as an awareness way larger than that of the individual. I will say, well, there are many examples I will not give here, many examples throughout the world of this happening. But I would say that the 80 peasants in the community of San Jose Apartado, as well as in many other places, I would say a sense of finite individuality has temporarily faded to a background to be replaced by a larger awareness or consciousness that we can call world awareness. That awareness is not fully confined by a modern and Western habitus, which demands that a human perform as an individual. That is, as a monolithic subject who owns a body, has a permanent identity, and is therefore in possession of one perspective. Instead, in the community, and in cases like this, and there are many others I could speak of, the member of the community is a co-participant in a larger field of awareness, which is intuitive, multi-perspectival, and not limited to logic, reason, or dualistic thought. He or she breathes, lives, and works in conjunction with others. Her body is attuned to and coextensive with the road, the heat, the banana trees, the river, the stones, the chickens, the running children, the laboring neighbors, the dead, and yes, the soldiers. The soldiers are very much part of this field. When Patricio, Jimena, or anybody else says, I am the leader, they are not withholding the truth. They are not hiding the truth. They are actually speaking it. Everyone is a leader, for everyone is equally involved in the process of resisting. Everyone is equally responsible, and no one can not be held accountable. The meaning of death in this context is transformed when one's awareness transcends ego for a few hours even, when our linear and solid sense of self is challenged by the unexpected, the incongruous, or the dramatic. I developed this a little bit more, but I want to mention here, and again I have a lot of different elements here to talk about, but I want to mention that this situation that I'm talking about is very important and interesting from the perspective of communication and conflict. And it really, the reason I find it very important is that it defies logic. It defies what we expect is a response to aggression. But I want to mention as well that in the scene that I have mentioned before, if I were to use principles of both common to phenomenology and Zen, this is part of my interest here. It's grounded on a paper by Algis called Zen, a dialogue with phenomenology. In the case that I have mentioned, I see a few elements that I would really like to explore more, and I'm just starting to see. First, a dissolution of dualistic logic. Second, an emergence of a third way which dissolves, transcends, or confounds dualism. Third, the impermanence of categories and relationships we otherwise assume are solid, like leader, follower, or army, peasant. Four, a dissolution of opposites, like self and other. Five, a manifestation of world awareness provoked by a dire Zen stick brought to the neck. In this moment of openness, perhaps because a Zen master has hit us over the head with a stick, or a soldier has pointed his weapon to our heart, or the beloved has died in our arms, there is a gap to our understanding of what is natural and given, a moment of wakefulness that allows us to experience the unrepeatable, ephemeral, and utterly fresh present moment. This is, in Zen terms, the direct method. And in this case, is actually the daily reality of a group of peasants resisting the aggression of at least 3 different kinds of armed actors in Colombia. I think that, well, I don't know how much time I have. Okay. So, should we see the pictures? Yes?
Yes.
Oh, all right. One of the, again, I mentioned I have at least 5 different scenes. In all of these, what I'm talking about is the fact that the peasants, because of the situation in which they are of resistance, are in a position in which they are constantly forced even to unknow that which is a given. And that act of unknowing is what which allows them to survive. I have an anecdote I would like to give, and I do not know if I had time, where I faced this when I came to visit. Let me just try to make it brief. I went to visit the community, and from the place where I was, I had to go about 3 hours on a mule to another hamlet. And I was on a mule myself, not my means of transportation. And I saw officers or people who were armed nearby, and one of them approached me. I was absolutely almost hysterical with fear. I am quite afraid of armed actors with guns. he approached me, and I was alone, and I was on a mule, and I was in the middle of a plaza. I could have not felt more vulnerable. He approached me with a gun and said, "Where are you going?" And in that moment, I remember my Buddhist practice and the Buddhist principles that say, hold your seat. So simple. And I was on a mule, so I tried to hold my seat. And I said, hang it up. I know that to the army you cannot give any information, it's very dangerous. So he said, so where are you going? I said, nowhere. That's a lot of equipment for nowhere, because the mule was full of food. We were bringing to a community of peasants. I'm like, yeah, isn't it? Just kind of like what I said to Pilora yesterday, 2 days ago, Joe, when he remarked on my many pieces of luggage. Yeah, isn't it? A lot of luggage. And he continued to point the weapon at me, and I was freezing, and I was very, very frightened, because this was an interrogation. And the outcome of interrogation can be revealing where peasants are, and this is terribly importantly dangerous. I held my seat, and I looked. And in that moment, what I saw was completely different. What I saw was, first, an armed man pointing at me, basically putting me at risk for my life. When I looked, unknowing, when I emptied my cup, in Zen terms, I emptied my cup of expectations, and I saw him. I saw an 18-year-old. I did not see an 18-year-old. You don't see 18-year-olds when you're seeing a gun. I saw an enemy. Second time I looked, I saw an 18-year-old. So when he asked me, where are you going? And why are you carrying these? And I said, And then I saw him and said, how about you? And that cut through it for him. He never, we were playing a game. He interrogates, I answer. He continued to interrogate, I avoid. But I said, how about you? And then I said, pay military service? And he said, yeah. The moment he said, yeah, I knew I won. I said, like, do you miss your girlfriend? And she's like, yeah, man, this sucks. And I'm like, so sorry for you. And said, and now you have to go and fight guerrillas. I wish you the best. And then other soldiers approached, and there was this absolutely incredible moment, which there were 20 soldiers sitting with their rifles looking at me, while the officers on the distance looking at this scene of me on a mule. And the last thing I said to him, and this is where I think what Algis talks about eminent stories. Wow, that's something that we really need to explore. An eminent story came out of my mouth. I said, and I will never say in another country, I said, bless you. You may be blessed. I will never say that in another context because I'm not a religious person. But he and I, because of unknowing, again, going to Bernie Glassman, because I knew, then I could bear witness to a situation, then I could act skillfully, and now that was not an enemy anymore. That was a man afraid for his life, as oppressed as I, or more, and peasant as well. A man who is forced to carry a gun. And when I said, bless you, I knew he will never shoot me. But no, it went beyond that. I knew that if he shot me, I would be okay with that. Because we saw each other. We saw each other's humanity. And that's what I mean by the breaking of duality. That's what I mean by recognizing the impermanence of dichotomies. That's what I mean by the fact that in this presentation, I can tell you who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. These are the new leaders. These gorgeous young girls. And these are the rules of the community I cannot go into. This community works in cooperation. They don't own anything individually. They do everything together. On Thursdays is day for cooperation. They are constantly attacked by the government because the presence of the peace community implies that the state does not have the monopoly on force. This community survives without any connection to guns. This is unbearable, and so it's constantly attacked. This community has kitchens without borders. It's something like Doctors Without Borders, but for food. All of the children are fed in the community, all go to school. She's showing me the book and the belly. This is one of the leaders. He receives death threats constantly. But when I talk to him, I don't see a death threat. What I see is a passion and a form of livelihood, of liveness that I don't know, that I don't have here, or I don't have in Bogota. That has to do with an awareness that's completely grounded on the land. It's completely grounded on a lived context. That's me. And here, let me tell you who the enemies are and how those enemies dissolved. If we have way more time, I would like to talk about the embodiment of the war, because the war is carrying our bodies. And these are obviously very significant. This is the army. These are the guerrillas. Please tell me how are they different? I cannot tell them apart. They are different. The guerrillas carry more flags. The army is more subtle about it. Here are the paramilitaries, more flags. Tell me a difference. Far right, far left, far right, far left, far right, far left, far right. Coming from the same place, same family. The police. Ta-da! The drug cartels, these are all the armed actors in this conflict. Very difficult conflict because it breaks dualism. Who are the good guys, who are the bad guys? How many bad guys do you want? We have plenty of them. The military support. We have new bases in Colombia. We have billions of dollars for the war, constantly, for the much of the recent years. But let's look at the other side. Indigenous people, women, peasants, civilian resistance. Ma, how you deal with that? Unarmed peasants, semi-armed. Indigenous people who, instead of weapons, use sticks, literally sticks, and the sticks symbolize power, and organize the community with the sticks, and they state, masters as they are, wars without action are empty, actions without wars are blind, wars and action without the spirit of the community are dead. Now that is power. That is power. And with that, I conclude.